The first time I tasted salt in his kiss, it wasn't from the ocean. It was from the blood on his lips, cracked and trembling after he crashed through my front door at 2:14 in the morning, barefoot and shaking, with only a pair of ruined jeans clinging to his soaked frame. I hadn't seen Emery in nearly 4 years, and he wasn't supposed to be alive. The last message anyone got from him was a blurry video of him standing at the edge of the Pacific, whispering something about how he'd finally found peace. That night his phone washed ashore in a tide pool near Big Sur, and everyone, including me, assumed the worst. I'd grieved for Emery in every way you're supposed to mourn someone who took their own life, quietly, with guilt and in pieces. So when he appeared in my hallway, smelling of brine and sweat, his ribs pressing against skin like fragile scaffolding, my mind did the only thing it could. It broke a little. He collapsed before I could even say his name. I carried him to the couch, still half asleep, wondering if I was dreaming or hallucinating or finally losing my grip on reality like my therapist warned I might. But no, he was real. His breath was shallow and fast, his hands twitching with cold and trauma. "Don't call anyone," he rasped, eyes wide and wild as I reached for my phone. "Please, Ollie, they'll find me." That word cracked open something deep. What do you say when the boy you thought had drowned walks into your home like a ghost, afraid, alone, hunted? I wrapped him in a blanket, poured hot water into a chipped mug, and tried not to ask questions I didn't want the answers to. I kept thinking about how we'd met, how we'd fallen in love beside the sea the summer after high school, sneaking kisses behind dunes and writing poems on each other's skin with sunscreen. That memory felt like it belonged to another life. The Emery on my couch wasn't the boy who ran into the surf screaming at seagulls or sang Fleetwood Mac at 2 a.m. on the beach. This Emery flinched at every sound and muttered things in his sleep that didn't make sense. Things like they buried it under the lighthouse and the salt keeps it alive. I didn't understand what any of it meant, not yet, but I held him anyway, whispering, "You're safe now," knowing full well I might be lying. Because even in the dark, even drenched and half-broken, his kiss tasted of something I hadn't felt in years: salt, grief, and love. And something else I didn't want to admit yet: fear. The days that followed Emery's return were surreal, like watching a shipwrecked man trying to remember how to walk on land. He never left the house, and I never asked why. I kept the windows drawn, the blinds shut, and a bottle of whiskey within arm's reach as we navigated this strange, unfinished reunion. The phone never stopped ringing, but I ignored it, unsure whether it was a ghost or someone from his past trying to drag him back into whatever dark hole he'd crawled out of. Emery's eyes, though, were the most unsettling thing. They were always scanning, always on alert, as though he was waiting for something or someone to come crashing through the door again. He slept fitfully, if at all, curled up at the foot of my bed like an animal that knew it wasn't quite safe but didn't have anywhere else to go. At night, I could hear him mumbling in his sleep, his words coming out in fragments. "It wasn't supposed to end like this. I should have told you," and more chillingly, "The ocean is calling me back." But the worst part was when he'd wake up, his hands trembling as he reached for me like a man afraid that if he didn't touch me, I might vanish too. The first time he did that, I didn't know what to do. It had been years since I felt the warmth of his touch, and even though it was the touch of someone broken and haunted, I could still feel the ghost of that old love between us, raw, unfinished, tender. I let him hold me even if my mind screamed at me to pull away. The salt from his lips, that familiar taste that used to be a sign of our carefree summers by the sea, now felt like a brand, like it was marking me in ways I couldn't yet understand. One evening, as we sat in silence at the kitchen table, he looked at me for the first time in what felt like days. His expression was unreadable, a mask of sorrow that was nearly unbearable. "You never asked me why I left," he said, his voice hoarse but with a weight behind it that made my heart skip. I could feel the pressure building in the air between us, the space where everything unspoken hung heavy. I didn't know if I wanted to hear the answer. "I didn't think you'd come back," I replied softly, trying to meet his gaze. But even as I said it, I realized how much of a lie it was. I knew something was wrong. I knew that whatever had happened to him out there, whatever had dragged him away from me, was never going to let him go. His smile, bitter and dark, sent a shiver down my spine. "You were always going to be part of this," he whispered, the words falling between us like stones sinking into the deep of the ocean. And then, without warning, he reached over, grasped my hand, and pulled me toward him. "Ollie, I need you to know. The reason I left is because I made a deal with something darker than I ever realized, and now it's coming to collect." I froze, the weight of his words pulling me under. And for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just a story of a lost love returning. It was a story of a love cursed by something far worse than distance or time. Something dangerous, something beyond us both. The next few days felt like the world was closing in around me. I kept trying to make sense of what Emery had said, the deal he'd made, and the more I tried to ask him for details, the more he pulled away, as if speaking about it would rip open something that had been stitched shut with the threads of his own torment. He'd sit by the window for hours, staring out at the ocean like it was calling him, beckoning him back to whatever dark bargain he'd struck. It was as though the ocean had claimed him in a way I didn't fully understand yet. Every time I asked him what had happened out there, he would just shake his head, his eyes haunted, lips parted but silent, as though the words were too dangerous to speak aloud. The salt on his lips had become a permanent stain, a reminder of something more profound than the love we once shared. It was something ancient, alive, and somehow still tethered to the water. One night after he had fallen into one of his fits of restless sleep, I finally ventured into the attic. I didn't know why I'd gone up there, maybe some distant instinct telling me to look for something, anything that might explain what had happened. The air in the attic was thick with dust and the smell of old wood, and as I sifted through cardboard boxes filled with forgotten relics of my childhood, I came across a worn journal, Emery's journal. My heart skipped as I recognized the leather cover, the familiar handwriting that had once scrawled love notes on napkins and backs of postcards. I opened it cautiously, as if afraid it might bite. The first page was a chaotic jumble of thoughts and sketches, but as I flipped through the pages, one phrase kept appearing over and over. The ocean chooses who lives and who dies, it never lets you go. I felt my pulse race as I read further. Emery had been obsessed with the ocean long before that summer we fell in love. He had this fascination with its depths, its power, its mysterious pull. He believed it was alive, breathing, watching, listening. He spoke of it like it was a force with its own will, capable of claiming you if you weren't careful. I had brushed it off back then as just another one of his romantic, poetic musings, but now reading these words, a chill swept through me. The things he had seen, the things he had experienced out there in the waves, were not the musings of a love-struck teenager. They were the ravings of someone who had been touched by something far darker. Suddenly, a cold wave of realization hit me. The ocean wasn't just a metaphor in Emery's world, it was a living, breathing entity, and now it was coming for him, and by extension for me. The salt in his kiss wasn't just a trace of the ocean, it was a mark, a residue of whatever had crossed over with him when he returned. He hadn't come back from the ocean unscathed, he'd brought something with him, something that was slowly creeping into the edges of our lives like the tide inching toward the shore, relentless and inevitable. I had always believed that love could save someone, but the ocean, whatever it was that had claimed Emery, was not something that could be saved. It was a force that would swallow us both whole, whether we were ready or not. I slammed the journal shut, my hands shaking, and made my way back downstairs. Emery was sitting in the same spot by the window, eyes lost in the horizon. "We need to leave," I said, the words tasting like an ultimatum. Now, but even as I said it, I knew it was already too late. The ocean had already claimed its prize, and I, standing beside him, was no longer just a witness, I was part of it. And no matter how fast I ran, the salt would still linger on my skin. The next morning, everything felt suffocatingly still, like we were trapped inside a thick, oppressive silence, as though the very air around us was holding its breath. Emery didn't speak much, but his eyes never left the ocean, its endless expanse of water now something alien to me. I'd always found peace there. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore was like a lullaby. But now, standing beside Emery, it felt like the ocean was no longer a sanctuary. It was a predator. Every wave that curled and broke against the rocks seemed to carry a promise that it wasn't finished yet, and it wasn't just Emery that it wanted anymore, it was me too. There was no escaping it, no way to run from the consequences of his deal, no matter how far we went. I suggested we go to the police to tell them everything, to explain that Emery was alive, that something had happened to him out there that was beyond our understanding. But Emery shook his head vehemently. "They'll think I'm insane. You don't understand, Ollie. If I tell anyone the truth, it'll follow us. It'll come for all of us. It's already coming for us." His voice broke at the end, and for the first time since he walked through my door, I saw something more terrifying than I had ever imagined in his eyes: guilt. He didn't just fear what was after him. He feared what he had brought back with him. The ocean was not something you could leave behind. It had followed him, and now it wanted me too. The sky had started to cloud over, an ominous storm brewing just over the horizon. I should have left then. I should have told him it was too much, that whatever bargain he had made wasn't worth the price we were about to pay. But as I stood there watching him, feeling the weight of his presence more than the storm that was building around us, I realized that I couldn't walk away from him again, not after everything. I had once believed that love could conquer anything, that if I held on long enough, Emery and I could somehow fix the broken parts of ourselves. But now I saw the truth in his eyes that love was never enough when you were dealing with something that wasn't human, and it wasn't just the ocean that had changed him, it was what the ocean had given him. As the wind began to pick up, I pulled him close, my hands trembling as I touched his cheek, still warm, still familiar. Emery, I whispered, the words feeling fragile as though I were speaking a prayer. Whatever it is, whatever you've done, we'll face it together. I wanted to believe it, truly I did. But deep down, I knew there was something irrevocable between us now, something beyond my ability to control or fix. Emery pulled away just slightly, his lips pressing to my forehead in a kiss that tasted bitter salt, yes, but also the sharpness of something that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't love, not anymore. It was something darker, more desperate. And then through the growing wind I heard it, a voice soft, almost imperceptible at first. It was coming from the ocean. Calling his name, my heart clenched as I felt the chill of the voice creep into my bones. And then without warning, Emery stood up, his eyes locked on the horizon, his body stiff with recognition. "It's here," he whispered almost to himself, and before I could stop him, he was running toward the water, barefoot and wild. I stood there, paralyzed, watching him disappear into the mist. The ocean had come to collect, and this time it wasn't just calling for him, it was calling for both of us. The salt on my lips, the taste of it, wasn't just the sea anymore. It was the price of a love that had never belonged to us. And as I stood there, helpless against the pull of the tide, I knew the ocean would have us both. I should have screamed. I should have begged him to stop, to come back. But the words never left my mouth because deep down, somewhere I couldn't quite admit, I knew that running wasn't going to save us. Emery had always been tied to the ocean, even when we were young, his laughter as wild as the waves, his dreams as deep and unknowable as the water's depths. I thought we could outgrow it, that love could be a bridge to something landlocked, something safe. But I had been wrong. We weren't running toward freedom. We were running toward something inevitable, a reckoning neither of us could escape. The ocean had claimed him, and now it was coming for me too. I don't know how long I stood there, minutes, hours. It felt like time was unraveling before I moved. But when I did, my feet seemed to have a mind of their own. I was running after him, heart hammering, adrenaline surging, my body a machine driven by pure instinct. I could hear the waves crashing louder, louder, a cacophony of sound that seemed to swallow everything around me. I reached the water's edge just as Emery stepped into the surf, the foam curling around his ankles, and for a brief moment he turned to look at me. There was something in his eyes, something resigned, something tired, but in that glance I understood everything. He had never truly belonged to me, he had always belonged to the ocean. "Emery," I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the roar of the waves. He didn't answer, he didn't need to. I stepped forward, hesitating for just a moment, and then the ocean pulled me in. Not gently, not with the graceful sweep of a lover's arms. It grabbed hold of me, sharp and violent, yanking me beneath the water, pulling me under with a force I had never known. Salt filled my lungs, my throat, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was as if the ocean itself was drowning me, claiming me just as it had claimed him. And then I saw him through the murky depths, a shadow against the sun. Emery's face pale and lost, his body floating with the ease of someone who had surrendered to something greater than themselves. He was waiting for me, his outstretched hand, palm open, beckoning me deeper into the abyss. It was then that I understood the ocean wasn't taking us, it was reclaiming us. We had always been part of it, even when we tried to swim away, even when we thought we could escape. I reached for him, my fingers brushing his, but as soon as I touched his skin, I felt the electric shock of something other, something not human, not alive in the way we understood it. The ocean wasn't a body of water, it was a spirit, a presence that bent us to its will. My heart stopped in that moment, a final, terrible realization settling in. Emery had never been lost, he had been chosen. And now so was I. The waves crashed over us, and the taste of salt, his kiss, our love, our past, flooded my senses. And for the first time I understood what he meant when he whispered, "The ocean never lets you go." As I felt myself being drawn deeper, further from the surface, from the air, I knew that the love we had, the love we thought we shared, had never been a simple thing. It had been a tide, sweeping us both toward something we had never fully understood. And as we sank, I felt the ocean finally close over us, swallowing us whole. The salt was no longer just on our lips, it was part of us, binding us to the depths forever.